now we're going to go to Mr. Alex Nicholson, who's our last speaker. As I say, last but not least, very much. Mr. Nicholson is talking about the value of a law degree, a perspective from UK providers. He is Principal Lecturer and Deputy Head of Law at the Department of Criminology at Sheffield Hallam University, a solicitor, an academic, an educationalist, and also has run a video production business. So we're going to be playing a video to start with. We're going to be playing a video of Mr. Nicholson's presentation, then he'll be available for questions. And please remember to text in your message in your questions to me during the course of the presentation. It will help a lot. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Alex Nicholson and I'm the Deputy Head of Law at Sheffield Hallam University in the UK. In my presentation today, I'm going to present my research in relation to the legal education market, and I've been specifically looking at the value of a law degree. This work was prompted by a rising trend, in the UK at least, for society and politicians to perceive higher education as merely about employability. It's merely about the economic value that students can gain from their studies. Instinctively, as a provider, I know that a law degree is worth much more than what it can do for a student's employability. And so I started this research some time ago looking at the marketing discipline and the literature there, and I created the model that you can see on the slide now, the value slices model of higher education, which is designed to help us as providers to identify the existing value that our courses provide, and then to develop that value further and articulate it to our markets. And so what it does is it breaks down the holistic value of a law degree into different segments based on types of value that can be found within the marketing discipline. So I identified the following slices. Firstly, symbolic value, what it might mean to study a law degree to particular students. Then lifetime value, so the benefits that students might gain through studying a law degree that they don't realise until many, many years later. Instrumental value, and this is where that idea of economic value and perhaps achieving particular career aims might come from. That's very much a part of the holistic value of a law degree. Community value relates to the value that you might be able to give back to your communities as a student during your studies. Experiential value is the experience that you have of studying the programme, whether that's enjoyment or interest or similar. And then finally, sacrifice value. What's the difference between what you as a student have to put in, whether that's time or money, and what you get out of it? So these different segments help us to see holistically what the value of a law degree is. And the study that I'm particularly presenting today was to look at the UK legal education market, recognising that there is this increasing trend to focus on the employability aspects and the economic value of programmes, and to say, to what extent are UK providers supporting that theme? Are they playing that tune? Or is there perhaps another way that they're putting this forward? Are we as UK providers doing enough to show the market that actually the holistic value of a law degree is much more than perhaps society and politicians might perceive it to be? So the aim of my study was to better understand the value of a law degree as it's currently articulated by UK legal education providers. And these were the objectives. I wanted to identify the key aspects of value that were currently being articulated in the UK market. So was there a particular focus on one or more of those value slices? I wanted to identify the aspects of value that were most and least commonly emphasised. And I wanted to identify points of meaningful difference that were currently being articulated. And all of this was to try and formulate recommendations for value creation and/or market reform. So what I did was I used a case study approach focusing on the UK market, and I reviewed the online prospectus pages for law courses at over 50 UK institutions. So this was intended to give me a good picture, a broad picture of the market, and to see what exactly we as providers were saying to the market about the value of our courses. And here are the findings. So I plotted these onto my value slices model. Now, statistical representativeness is not claimed here because of the subjective nature of value, but I think this model illustrates, at least symbolically, what we're saying in the UK to prospective students about the value of their courses. So you can see here that in those online prospectus pages, the single most important aspect of value that we're articulating is that instrumental value. It is about this is what the course will give you if you come and study it here. And so it is about things like employability. There's a really heavy emphasis on that. There's also a reasonably strong emphasis in those prospectus pages on the experiential value, whether students will enjoy their experience. And then there's a significant component relating to sacrifice value. How much are you going to have to put in versus how much are we going to give you back? And this table here illustrates how that plays out across the sample of 50 law schools that I looked at. So you can see here that this is based on overall word count in the online prospectus pages and how much of that word count is devoted to these different segments. You can see here that the largest proportion of the word count is devoted to the instrumental value, achieving that objective, achieving a particular employment or a particular future salary perhaps. And it might also talk about aspects of quality. That was the single most important component of these prospectus pages. And what this table also shows is that that's a pretty consistent picture across the sample. So you can see in the left-hand column there, the overall column, what the word count looks like across the whole sample. But then if you look at the mean and the median, you can see they're very closely aligned to that overall picture. So broadly speaking, what this tells us is that UK legal education providers are telling the market that the value of their course is pretty much the same as the value of another course. They're emphasizing the same components. Now let's have a look at specifically what they were saying. So within this category of instrumental, which seems to be a key area of focus, here's what they were saying to the market. 100%, so all of the law schools in the sample, emphasised the fact that the course would help graduates to qualify into the legal profession. That is the single most significant and most articulated message that law schools in the UK are giving providers. Every single law school in the sample said this course will help you qualify as a lawyer. So they're emphasising very much that rhetoric that we're seeing in society and amongst politicians today. The second most common aspect of instrumental value was that the course will help graduates to succeed in non-law careers. 87% of the providers in the sample articulated this as a key aspect of value. So again, playing into that rhetoric that going to university, studying a law degree is about qualifying as a lawyer, or it's about perhaps transferable skills and qualifying into other areas of employment. So really strong emphasis there. And then the third most common aspect of instrumental value was this idea of quality. 79% of the sample were saying, come to us because our course is of high quality. We've got good staff, or we've got a good course. It's all really high quality. Now, these are not controversial statements. What's interesting is that all of the providers are saying the same thing. They're all saying, we'll help you qualify as a lawyer, we'll help you getting useful employment elsewhere, and we've got a really high quality course. What about experiential then, this experience that you're going to have by studying the course? Well, 60% of the providers said that students on the course would have the opportunity to study abroad. They're saying this is something to try and differentiate themselves. Come to our course because we're going to give you this different experience. We're going to give you the opportunity to study abroad, which does sound distinctive, but actually 60% of the providers in the sample were offering that. Almost as high, 58%, said that students on the course would have opportunities to enhance their experience through work-related learning and or placements. Again, we might think of work-related learning and placement opportunities as a distinctive part of the offer, something that really provides extra value. But 58% of the providers said that they were offering this. And then finally, in the sacrifice category, students on the course receive high quality support from staff. 75% of the providers said that. Scholarships and or funding may be available to students on the course. 62% of the providers said that. And so what we're seeing here across all of these categories is that providers in the UK are articulating a particular conception of value. They're telling the market that the value of the course is about predominantly qualifying as a lawyer and employability. And they are articulating many of the same themes. If you look at different law school prospectus pages as a prospective student, you're going to find that most of them are telling you that the value of their program is pretty much the same. Now, that's a problem in what we call a red ocean market, a market where there's an increasing number of competitors and there's little to choose between them. If law schools in the future are going to have a sustainable competitive advantage, then they need to differentiate themselves more clearly. And here are just a few things that I found that UK legal education providers were not saying in their online prospectus pages. So here's where there might be some opportunities to develop some really unique value within that market. There was almost no mention of SQE alignment. The SQE is the Solicitors Qualifying Examination, and from 2021, all would-be lawyers, or would-be solicitors at least in the UK, will have to pass a centralised assessment in order to qualify. And yet, only 18% of the sample of law school pages even mentioned this really important centralised assessment that's coming for would-be lawyers, despite saying that the course will help you to qualify as one. And an even smaller percentage, only 8%, said that their course would actually help you to pass that centralised assessment. So there's a really obvious way that providers could differentiate themselves. Remarkably, very few providers said anything about technological innovation. There was an occasional reference to things like case management software, but no courses are really doing anything that is technologically transformed. And that seems to me to be another key area where providers could differentiate themselves. And then finally, and perhaps most surprisingly, providers said very little about the personal meaning that studying a law degree, or indeed any degree, might have for prospective students, and very little about those long-term lifetime benefits. To finish then, I want to briefly introduce you to another piece of research that I'm currently working on the same theme, and this is looking at the student perspective. I've conducted life history interviews with past and present students of my own institution and tried to identify what value they perceive. Developed two models that show this, and these slides will be available for you to look at afterwards. But this first one is a value slices model of those students in the sample that shows what they value. And you can see that they do really value instrumental value and qualification as a lawyer, employability enhancement. Those things are really important to them. But the other categories are also significant. Lifetime value, in particular, is more significant than it appears to be in the prospectus pages, as is symbolic value. So there may be areas here where law schools can look to move into. So that pretty much concludes my presentation. The value slices model is about trying to work out the current value of an existing program, then looking at areas where we can develop that value, either because it's an area of unique value or it's because students that we're trying to attract particularly value a particular aspect. And then how do we articulate that value to them? Thank you for listening.
Hey, Alex, thank you very much. And please let me have any questions. I've certainly got one, which is very much from my own experience. I can remember I had a professor at Oxford, Professor Brian Simpson, who you may know, but who passed on a few years back. But he said to us in our first summer term, "What are you doing going to lectures? You should be out there punting on the river and enjoying yourself." You know, this is how he saw the university. You'll get a degree anyway. I think that was maybe the 1970s. That's a different world. But there is a serious point here, which is this. I found here at CUHK Law that the students, particularly the younger ones, the LLB students, they don't have a world view. They have a very short-term view. It's largely based on spoon-fed school teaching, parents' influence, and so on. And they come here, they're not quite sure why they're here. They want to be a lawyer, and you know, they come along and they enjoy the parties and the life, and yeah, all the things you've mentioned. But as I did at university, but then you don't know what you don't know. And if you do not teach students, if you don't give them this full picture, the vocational training aspect of it, really, I mean, it's telling them, you know, how it all fits in with business and so on. Which I never had any idea about. I was going off to Professor Hart, Ronnie Dawkins, and all these great philosophical lawyers, these great jurisprudence, you know, analytical people. And then I sat down on my first day, you know, in my articles, it was then called, and was given all these forms to do and sent off to London to go to creditors meetings, and absolutely nothing to do with what I've been doing at university. And I just think, my question I'm coming to, taking lawyers who are perhaps 3 or 4 or 5 years out of university, they've gone down the road, they're now in a law firm or chambers, and asking them what they thought about their legal education, I would think would be a far more valuable exercise. Now, I see that you've actually included past students in your analysis, but have you actually broken out their views separately from those of the current students? Going back to my point about you don't know what you don't know, because surely, and you know, we've had today at various points, we've had various alumni talking to us, and I think they have a rather different view of the value of their degree. Sorry, it's a rather long question, but I think you know what I'm saying. So over to you.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, your reflections there very much resonate with the life history interviews that I've conducted, that I referred to at the end of the presentation. You're absolutely right. On day one, and I teach contract law as a first year module. On day one, I asked the lecture theatre to put their hands up. You know, who wants to be a lawyer? Who wants to qualify as a solicitor or a barrister? Every single person puts their hand up. And in the life history interviews that I conducted, those that were earlier on in their journey, so a first year student, for example, had that very clear and arguably quite shallow view that says, you know, I've come here because I want to qualify as a lawyer, and I had that outcome. Having said that, even those who are more experienced, so in the interviews I also interviewed people who were practicing at partner level even, and as they reflected back on on their choices, they also recognised that at that early stage that was what they wanted. Although some of them, and one participant sticks in my mind in particular, who was at partner level, reflected on the fact that really that she didn't feel that her experience had been very useful at all. So she framed it very much in these terms. I went to university because I wanted to be a lawyer. I've now become a lawyer, and I don't think that my degree was very useful, and struggled perhaps to identify some of those other aspects of value. So I think this is a long way of saying that I think that value is such an inherently subjective concept, and as providers, all we can really hope to do is try and understand general themes that will help us to develop our programs. And the key message, I think, coming out of my research into the UK legal education market was that providers in general are selling their programs on the basis that they promise students that this will enable them to qualify as lawyers. And I suppose in answering the question that I've posed myself to the earlier presenter about whether that's ethical or not, I think that there's a serious point there. I think if we as providers are going to say, come to university and complete this course, it will enable you to qualify as a lawyer and recruit on that basis, then I think in order to kind of maintain our conscience, if we like, then we do have to firstly ensure that our courses actually do offer that aspect of value. And I think that's questionable in some courses, at least in the UK legal education market at the moment, where other aspects of value are prioritised. So we do actually need to offer that. And then secondly, we need to ensure that our graduates, whether they go into law or not, do recognise the value of what we've provided, and that might be more holistic value. So I think a long answer to your long question, if that's okay, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. We've got to have one more question, and this is from Jeremy Dean, who's joint head of 25 Bedford, London, a barrister, who says, we have real difficulty in distinguishing between benefits of pupillage applicants attendant at the various law schools. How can law schools in the UK best promote the prospect of their students successfully gaining pupillage in such a competitive market?
Yes, it's very difficult, and I think it's particularly difficult when you have a market where the providers all look quite similar. Interestingly, in my research on online prospectus pages, my own institution wasn't included, and I think I was fortunate that it didn't come up as part of the random selection process, because it meant that I didn't have to comment necessarily on where we stood in that. But the focus of our course, I think I can say with confidence and with conscience, does do those two things that I articulated. And so we have an on-site campus law firm, for example, that all students at all levels of study work within that legal practice, and so we're providing them with legal work experience to an extent that other providers don't do, and that gives them that edge in the legal market, I think, whether they choose to go down the solicitor or the barrister route. But then there are also other things about our programme that provide that more holistic value, and so I think if providers can identify those opportunities to do something distinctive, as we've done at Sheffield Hallam, then I think that provides those students with an opportunity to differentiate themselves and to say, here's how my experience at this particular institution has equipped me for this particular career path, whether that's the solicitor route, the barrister route, or somewhere else. So,
Alex, I'm going to have to cut you off there. I'm afraid we're running out of time. Do you just want to wrap up quickly?
No problem. Yeah, so I was just going to say all of these themes very much come together, I think, and leave us with this key message that in this competitive time, it's for us as providers to be different and to be distinctive.
Okay, thank you very much to Alex, to Simon, Bruman and Sarah, Mr. Fernando Diaz-Simoes and Professor Royal Rajesh, thank you very much for a very stimulating debate, which has ranged from professionalism to law and morality and to the value of a degree and a perspective from the UK, which is just rounded up. So thank you all very much for your participation. Thanks for those of you who've patiently attended and listened in. And now we're going to move on to the final closing.